The cabin hummed with the low murmur of passengers settling into their first-class seats as Elise moved gracefully through the aisle, her polished smile masking the simmering tension beneath. She had worked countless flights, catering to wealthy elites who often treated her more like furniture than a person. But this flight was different. The air was thick with anticipation, and every gesture felt magnified under the weight of the presence in Seat 1A, Melania Trump. Elise's professionalism never wavered as she placed a tray on the table before the former First Lady, whose perfectly manicured fingers toyed with a crystal glass of water. The faintest curl of disdain touched Melania's lips as she glanced up. "This is lukewarm," she said, her tone cold enough to slice steel. "I'll replace it right away, ma'am," Elise replied, her voice measured, her steps brisk as she moved to rectify the complaint. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't just a comment. It was the culmination of years of biting her tongue, of enduring veiled insults and condescension from passengers who wielded power and privilege without a shred of empathy. As Elise returned with the glass, turbulence rattled the plane, causing her to stumble slightly. Water sloshed onto the edge of the tray, and Melania recoiled, her expression turning from indifference to icy disdain. "Is this what they call service these days?" she said, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. A few chuckled awkwardly, their eyes darting between the two women. Elise's cheeks burned. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting for her response. Her instincts screamed at her to let it go, to remain the picture of poise and professionalism. But something deep inside rebelled. She had spent her entire career swallowing indignities, bending over backward to accommodate people who never saw her as anything more than a uniform. And in that moment, she couldn't do it anymore. She straightened, her voice steady but cutting as she replied, "Even you can't demand respect without earning it." A gasp rippled through the cabin. Melania's eyes widened, her expression frozen in shock. The silence was deafening, broken only by the persistent hum of the engines. Elise's words hung in the air, their impact reverberating like a crack of thunder. The fallout was immediate. Passengers fumbled for their phones, recording the exchange as whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. Elise could feel the weight of what she had done settling on her chest, but she refused to look away. She held her ground, even as Melania's security detail stepped forward, their postures tense and commanding. "Miss," one of them said, his voice firm but composed, "we'll need to address this once we land." Elise nodded, her composure unbroken, even as her heart hammered in her chest. She didn't regret the words, but she knew what they would cost her. As the plane descended toward its destination, she braced herself for the storm that awaited. When the aircraft finally landed, Elise was escorted off the plane by airline officials, her face a mask of calm despite the chaos swirling around her. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the world seemed to close in around her. She caught fragments of the headlines already forming. "Flight attendant snaps at Melania Trump, disrespect in disguise, scandal at 35,000 feet." The airline wasted no time issuing a public apology, calling Elise's behavior unacceptable, and announcing her immediate suspension pending further investigation. Social media erupted into a frenzy, with opinions as polarized as the political landscape itself. Some condemned Elise as unprofessional and disrespectful, while others hailed her as a working-class hero standing up to unchecked privilege. Through it all, Elise remained silent. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and strangers, some offering support, others berating her for her actions. She knew the world would see this moment as an impulsive outburst, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know what had really driven her to speak those words, or the storm she had willingly unleashed to expose the rot hidden beneath the surface. The video of Elise's confrontation with Melania Trump spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was plastered across every corner of social media. Headlines ranged from sensational to accusatory. "Disrespect at 30,000 feet," and asterisk. "Flight attendant crosses the line." Asterisk major news outlets picked up the story, with panels of pundits dissecting every second of the footage. Some called Elise a disgrace to her profession, while others praised her as a voice for the unheard, standing against elitism. The divide was stark, and the firestorm had only just begun. Elise sat in her small apartment, her phone vibrating relentlessly on the coffee table. The notifications were endless: texts, emails, social media mentions. She didn't have the energy to look at any of it. The airline's official statement loomed in her mind. It had come just an hour after the incident, condemning her actions and assuring the public that she had been placed on immediate leave. The language was sterile, but the message was clear: she was expendable. Her inbox was flooded with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues expressed disbelief, some siding with her, others distancing themselves. "I don't know what you were thinking," one text read, "but you've made it harder for all of us." The words stung, but Elise wasn't surprised. The backlash wasn't limited to her professional life. Online, anonymous trolls tore her apart, labeling her as disrespectful, unhinged, and unfit for her job. Doxing threats trickled in, and Elise's address was posted on a forum she didn't dare visit. Fear crept in as she double-checked the locks on her door, her heart racing with every unfamiliar sound. But amidst the hate, there was an undercurrent of support. Messages poured in from service workers, retail employees, and flight attendants who recognized the unspoken frustrations Elise had voiced. "You said what all of us have wanted to say for years," one message read. Another simply said, "Thank you for standing up to them." Elise's face, now a symbol of controversy, was dissected on every major network. Her professionalism was questioned, her motives speculated upon. Psychologists debated her mental state, politicians used the incident to fuel their agendas, and celebrities weighed in for their moment of relevancy. Each narrative twisted the event into something it wasn't, amplifying the noise until Elise could barely hear her own thoughts. The airline, desperate to contain the fallout, reached out with a terse email offering a chance to resign quietly. The implication was clear: if she didn't step down, they would make an example of her. Elise ignored it. She wasn't ready to bow out, not yet. Then came the phone call. It wasn't from the airline or a journalist, it was from an unfamiliar number. Against her better judgment, Elise answered, her voice raw with exhaustion. On the other end was a calm, measured voice introducing themselves as part of Melania Trump's team. "We'd like to understand your side of the story," the voice said, as if they were offering her an olive branch. But Elise knew better than to trust it. She declined politely and hung up, her mind racing with questions. Elise's friends urged her to speak out, to explain herself before the media twisted the narrative even further. But what could she say? The truth behind her actions was far too complicated, and revealing it now would only add fuel to the fire. Instead, she kept silent, letting the world speculate while she braced for the storm's next wave. In the days following the incident, rallies began forming outside the airline's headquarters. Protesters held signs demanding better treatment for service workers, chanting Elise's name as a rallying cry. The attention was both overwhelming and humbling. Elise had never set out to be a symbol, but now she was one, whether she wanted it or not. Despite the noise, Elise couldn't ignore the weight of her actions. Her outburst had sparked a movement, but it had also painted a target on her back. She didn't regret what she'd said, but she wondered if the cost was too high. Her career was in shambles, her reputation in tatters, and her future uncertain. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the notifications stopped buzzing and the world seemed to pause, Elise felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, people were paying attention to the frustrations and injustices she and so many others faced daily. Maybe, just maybe, her voice had made a difference. But as she stared at the anonymous message she'd received earlier that day, the hope was laced with fear. The message read, *, "You've started something big. Be ready." In the aftermath of the media frenzy, Elise found herself thrust into an entirely different reality. Overnight, she had become both a symbol of defiance and a lightning rod for controversy. Her anonymity was gone, replaced by a public persona she hadn't chosen. Her name was on every news ticker, her face on countless screens, and her story a subject of fierce debate. Yet beneath the chaos, something more significant began to stir. The support she received wasn't just limited to messages of solidarity. It came in the form of action. Advocacy groups for workers' rights reached out, offering platforms for her voice. Elise was hesitant at first, unsure of her place in the larger conversation. She wasn't an activist, she reasoned, she was just someone who had reached her breaking point. But as the days passed, she realized she couldn't afford to stay silent. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her first public statement came through a carefully crafted video posted on social media. Dressed simply, with no hint of the uniform that had come to define her, Elise spoke directly to the camera. Her tone was calm, measured, and deliberate. "This isn't about one moment on a flight," she began. "It's about the countless moments leading up to it. It's about a system that values appearances over humanity, profits over people." The response was immediate. The video garnered millions of views within hours, shared by influencers, activists, and everyday people alike. It shifted the narrative, reframing Elise's actions not as an isolated incident but as part of a broader fight for dignity and respect in the workplace. Still, not everyone was convinced. Critics accused her of seeking attention, of exploiting the situation for personal gain. Elise ignored the noise, focusing instead on the growing wave of support. It wasn't long before she was invited to speak at a rally organized by a coalition of unions and advocacy groups. The event, held in a sprawling public square, drew thousands of attendees. Standing before the crowd, Elise felt a mix of fear and determination. Public speaking had never been her strength, but the energy around her was undeniable. She spoke of her experiences, of the quiet indignities and outright discrimination she had witnessed over the years. Her words resonated, drawing cheers and chants that echoed through the square. Behind the scenes, however, the backlash intensified. The airline escalated its efforts to discredit Elise, releasing selective details about her work history in an attempt to paint her as a disgruntled employee. They pointed to minor infractions, missed shifts, a customer complaint from years ago, as evidence of her alleged unreliability. Elise's legal team, assembled by a workers' advocacy group, hit back, accusing the airline of defamation and retaliation. As the legal battle loomed, Elise began to uncover disturbing truths about the airline's operations. Whistleblowers, emboldened by her courage, came forward with damning information about systemic corruption, safety violations, and mistreatment of employees. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a culture of exploitation that spanned far beyond her incident with Melania Trump. Amid the mounting tension, Elise found herself in a clandestine meeting with an investigative journalist who had been tracking similar stories for years. The journalist revealed that the airline's connections extended into politics and finance, with powerful figures protecting its interests at the expense of workers. Elise's confrontation with Melania, they explained, had inadvertently exposed a web of corruption that was far more extensive than she'd imagined. The revelation shook Elise to her core. Her actions had already upended her life, but now she faced a choice: step back and let others take the lead, or dive deeper into the fight, knowing the risks involved. She chose the latter. Elise's newfound determination fueled her efforts. She worked with the journalist and other whistleblowers to compile evidence, exposing the airline's malpractices in a detailed report that would eventually make headlines worldwide. The report wasn't just a condemnation of the airline. It was a call to action, urging reform across industries where workers were routinely dehumanized and exploited. As the days turned into weeks, Elise's journey became a lightning rod for change. Politicians took notice, proposing legislation to address workplace inequalities. Advocacy groups used her story to galvanize support for broader movements. And through it all, Elise remained steadfast, her resilience inspiring others to stand up for themselves and their rights. Yet even as the tide began to turn, Elise knew the fight was far from over. The airline and its allies would continue to push back, using their resources to protect their interests. But for the first time, Elise felt something she hadn't in years: a sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was making a difference. And no matter the cost, she was ready to see it through. The ripple effects of Elise's actions reached far beyond what she could have anticipated. As her story gained traction, the public discourse began to shift. No longer was the focus solely on the perceived disrespect toward Melania Trump. Instead, deeper issues came to light: inequality, systemic exploitation, and the imbalance of power between workers and elites. The spotlight on Elise became a mirror reflecting society's broader flaws, and people were beginning to take notice. Elise's legal battle against the airline turned into a spectacle. The hearings were publicized, with media outlets covering every detail. The airline doubled down on its narrative, painting Elise as reckless and irresponsible, claiming her actions had jeopardized the safety of passengers. Their team presented witnesses, including colleagues who were coached to testify against her. Elise, seated beside her attorney, listened intently, her resolve unshaken. She knew the truth, and she was determined to see it revealed. Her attorney, a sharp and eloquent advocate, dismantled the airline's arguments piece by piece. Key evidence emerged: internal memos showing the company's deliberate efforts to prioritize profits over employee welfare, even at the expense of safety. These revelations were damning, but the airline's legal team fought back, seeking to discredit the evidence and redirect the narrative. Amid the courtroom drama, Elise continued to engage with the growing movement she had inadvertently sparked. She met with workers from other industries, teachers, nurses, retail employees, all of whom shared similar stories of being undervalued and overworked. Their stories fueled her determination, reminding her that this fight wasn't just about her or her profession, it was about a culture that needed to change. Elise's journey also brought unexpected allies. Former employees of the airline reached out, offering their support and sharing their own experiences. Some had been silenced by non-disclosure agreements, while others had left the industry altogether, disillusioned by years of mistreatment. Their collective voices added weight to Elise's cause, painting a picture of an industry rife with systemic issues. The journalist who had first approached Elise published a groundbreaking exposé. The article revealed the extent of corruption within the airline, including its ties to powerful political figures. It detailed how the company had used its influence to avoid scrutiny, manipulate regulations, and suppress dissent. Elise's confrontation with Melania Trump, the article argued, was the spark that had set off a much-needed reckoning. Public opinion began to shift further in Elise's favor. The initial outrage over her perceived disrespect was overshadowed by the revelations of corporate greed and political complicity. Support poured in from unexpected corners, including high-profile figures who used their platforms to amplify her message. Hashtags advocating for workers' rights trended on social media, and protests demanding accountability spread to other cities. Yet, amidst the growing momentum, Elise faced personal challenges. The constant scrutiny took its toll, as did the pressure to live up to the expectations of those who saw her as a leader. She struggled with self-doubt, wondering if she was equipped to handle the weight of the movement she had come to symbolize. The messages of hate, though fewer, still stung. Some accused her of exploiting the situation for fame, while others questioned her motives. It was a lonely and exhausting battle, but Elise refused to back down. Her determination was bolstered by moments of connection. A letter from a single mother working 2 jobs thanked Elise for giving her the courage to demand better conditions at work. A video message from a group of young activists expressed gratitude for the inspiration she had provided. These gestures reminded Elise of why she had taken this stand in the first place. The airline's tactics grew increasingly desperate. They attempted to settle the case out of court, offering Elise a substantial sum in exchange for her silence. Her attorney advised her to consider the offer, warning that a prolonged legal battle could drain her resources and leave her vulnerable. But Elise refused. Accepting the settlement, she believed, would mean abandoning the people who had rallied behind her. It would mean letting the airline and its allies win. As the case progressed, the pressure mounted. The media continued to dissect every aspect of Elise's life, digging into her past and speculating about her future. The movement she had inspired showed no signs of slowing down, with marches and rallies drawing larger crowds than ever. Elise found herself at the center of a cultural shift, one that demanded accountability from those in power and advocated for the dignity of all workers. Through it all, Elise remained steadfast. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that the fight was worth it. Her journey had become about more than one moment on a plane. It had become a battle for justice, equality, and respect. And as the world watched, Elise resolved to see it through, no matter the cost. The trial reached a critical juncture as Elise's legal team presented their strongest evidence yet, a series of internal emails and documents leaked by a whistleblower within the airline. These communications detailed strategies to suppress employee complaints, cut costs at the expense of safety, and lobby against worker protections. The courtroom fell silent as the damning words of executives were read aloud, their blatant disregard for employee well-being and ethical standards on full display. The prosecution attempted to argue that these documents were taken out of context, but the damage was already done. Public opinion, which had been teetering, now swung decisively in Elise's favor. News outlets dissected the evidence, running exposés that painted the airline as emblematic of corporate greed. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs demanding justice not just for Elise but for all workers trapped in exploitative systems. Elise herself became a symbol of resilience. Despite the immense pressure and constant media scrutiny, she stood firm, her resolve unshaken. Each day in court, she faced the airline's legal team with quiet determination, answering their pointed questions with honesty and clarity. Her poise under fire earned her widespread admiration, even from those who had initially doubted her intentions. The public support Elise received was overwhelming but came with challenges. Everyone wanted a piece of her story, a soundbite, an interview, a partnership. Advocacy groups saw her as a powerful spokesperson, while brands sought to align themselves with her newfound fame. Elise navigated these offers carefully, prioritizing her integrity over potential endorsements. She refused to let her cause be co-opted or diluted for commercial gain. Meanwhile, the movement she had inspired continued to grow. Workers from other industries began sharing their stories, using social media to shine a light on injustices in their own fields. The conversation expanded beyond the airline industry, touching on broader themes of inequality, discrimination, and the imbalance of power between employers and employees. Elise's confrontation with Melania Trump was no longer just an isolated incident. It had become a catalyst for a nationwide reckoning. Behind the scenes, Elise worked tirelessly with her legal team and advocacy groups to strategize the next steps. She knew that winning the court case was only one battle in a much larger war. She began drafting proposals for systemic reforms within the airline industry, focusing on improved working conditions, stricter safety regulations, and mechanisms for holding corporations accountable. These proposals, she hoped, would serve as a blueprint for change, not just in her industry but across all sectors. At the same time, Elise struggled with the personal cost of her fight. The stress of the trial, coupled with the relentless media attention, took a toll on her mental and emotional health. She found solace in the small moments, letters from supporters, conversations with fellow workers, and quiet nights spent reflecting on how far she had come. Her family and close friends became her anchors, providing unwavering support even as they too faced scrutiny. The airline, desperate to salvage its reputation, launched a public relations campaign aimed at discrediting Elise and deflecting attention from their wrongdoing. They released glossy ads emphasizing their commitment to diversity and inclusion, hoping to distract from the growing evidence against them. But these efforts backfired, as critics quickly pointed out the glaring hypocrisy of their messaging. The campaign only fueled public outrage, strengthening Elise's position. As the trial neared its conclusion, Elise was given the opportunity to take the stand and share her story. Her testimony was raw and unfiltered, detailing the years of mistreatment she and her colleagues had endured. She spoke of the systemic issues that had pushed her to her breaking point and the broader implications of her actions. "This isn't just about me," she told the court. "It's about the countless workers who feel invisible, unheard, and powerless. It's about creating a system where every person is treated with dignity and respect." Her words resonated deeply, drawing tears from some in the courtroom and sparking a renewed wave of solidarity among her supporters. Outside, crowds gathered to watch live coverage of her testimony, their cheers and chants echoing through the streets. Elise's courage inspired others to speak out, and the movement she had unintentionally started showed no signs of slowing down. In the final days of the trial, Elisa's legal team presented a closing argument that tied together all the evidence and testimony. They painted a compelling picture of an industry in desperate need of reform and a corporation that had prioritized profit over people for far too long. The jury, they argued, had a chance to set a precedent, to send a message that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Elise sat quietly as the jury deliberated, her hands clasped tightly together. She knew the outcome was out of her hands, but she also knew that, regardless of the verdict, she had already made an indelible impact. Her fight had sparked a conversation that could not be silenced, a movement that would continue to grow long after the trial ended. As the courtroom awaited the jury's decision, Elise felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had faced incredible odds and endured unimaginable pressure, yet she had stayed true to her values and her mission. Whatever came next, she was ready. The jury returned to the courtroom after days of deliberation, their expressions unreadable. The air was thick with anticipation, and Elise could feel her heart pounding in her chest. As the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, the room fell silent. The words that followed marked a pivotal moment not just for Elise but for the movement she had come to represent. The jury found the airline guilty of systemic negligence and workplace exploitation, awarding Elise a significant settlement and mandating sweeping reforms within the company. The decision was a resounding victory, not only for Elise but for workers across the industry. The courtroom erupted in applause, with supporters embracing one another as tears of relief and triumph streamed down their faces. Elise, though overwhelmed with emotion, managed a small, resolute smile. The ruling sent shockwaves through the corporate world. The precedent set by Elisa's case forced other companies to reevaluate their practices, fearing similar backlash. Industry leaders convened emergency meetings to discuss implementing reforms, while advocacy groups seized the momentum to push for broader legislation protecting workers' rights. Elisa's story became a rallying cry, symbolizing the power of resilience and collective action against injustice. But the end of the trial was not the end of Elisa's journey. The victory in court was only the beginning of the systemic change she sought to achieve. Elise declined interviews with sensationalist media outlets, instead choosing to focus on actionable steps. She partnered with labor unions and advocacy organizations, working to create a comprehensive workers' rights campaign that addressed the root causes of inequality and exploitation in the airline industry and beyond. As part of the settlement, Elise insisted on transparency in how the mandated reforms were implemented. She met with representatives from the airline to discuss changes, ensuring that promises made in court translated into real, measurable improvements. These meetings were tense, with executives resistant to some of the proposed measures, but Elise held firm. She reminded them, and herself, that her fight was never about vengeance but about accountability and creating a better future. The settlement funds were another point of contention. While some encouraged Elise to use the money for personal gain, she saw it as an opportunity to invest in the cause. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting workers in vulnerable industries, providing legal assistance, educational resources, and platforms to amplify their voices. The foundation quickly gained traction, with donations pouring in from supporters around the world. Elisa's advocacy work extended beyond the airline industry. She began speaking at conferences and universities, sharing her story and inspiring others to challenge the status quo. Her speeches were not about self-congratulation but about empowering others to take action in their own lives and communities. "Change doesn't come from one person," she often said. "It comes from all of us, standing together and refusing to accept what's wrong." Her newfound role as a public figure brought its own challenges. Elise was often exhausted, juggling the demands of her advocacy work with the pressures of being in the spotlight. Critics continued to surface, accusing her of ulterior motives or questioning her qualifications to lead such a movement. But Elise had learned to tune out the noise, focusing instead on the tangible impact of her efforts. Meanwhile, the cultural shift sparked by Elisa's actions continued to unfold. More whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by her courage, to expose wrongdoing in their own workplaces. Legislators introduced bills aimed at strengthening labor protections, many citing Elise's case as the impetus for their proposals. The media, which had once focused on the scandal surrounding her confrontation with Melania Trump, now highlighted the broader implications of her fight for justice. Elise's personal life began to stabilize as well. The support of her family and close friends remained a constant source of strength, grounding her amid the chaos. She reconnected with her love for aviation, though she chose not to return to her previous role as a flight attendant. Instead, she worked as a consultant, helping airlines prioritize employee welfare and safety. It was a way for her to stay connected to the industry she loved while continuing to drive change from within. As months turned into years, Elise's story became part of a larger narrative about resilience, transformation, and the fight for equality. Documentaries were made, books were written, and her name became synonymous with the idea that one person's courage could ignite a movement. Elise, however, remained humble, redirecting the attention back to the countless individuals who had joined her in the fight. One day, Elise found herself sitting on a panel alongside other advocates, discussing the progress made since her case. As she spoke about the importance of solidarity and the ongoing work required to achieve lasting change, she caught a glimpse of a young woman in the audience. The woman's eyes were wide with admiration, and Elise saw in her the same spark that had driven her to take a stand all those years ago. After the panel, the young woman approached Elise, thanking her for her bravery and sharing her own dreams of making a difference. Elise smiled warmly, offering words of encouragement and a reminder that change was always possible, no matter the odds. It was in moments like these that Elise felt the weight of her journey most acutely, not as a burden, but as a legacy she was proud to carry. Though the confrontation with Melania Trump had been the catalyst, the true story was about what followed: the fight for justice, the push for accountability, and the creation of a more equitable world. Elise's journey was far from over, but as she looked back on how far she had come, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She had turned a moment of crisis into a movement, proving that even the smallest actions could spark profound change. Years after the landmark trial, Elise's life had settled into a rhythm, though it was far from ordinary. Her work had grown into a global movement, transcending industries and borders. The foundation she had established became a cornerstone of advocacy for workers' rights, with offices in multiple countries and partnerships with organizations championing social justice. Elise often reflected on how a single moment, her impulsive words on that fateful flight, had become the spark for such widespread transformation. Elise's story had become a symbol, but she was always quick to redirect attention to the countless others who had joined the fight. At conferences, rallies, and boardrooms, she insisted on bringing frontline workers to the table, amplifying their voices and ensuring their experiences were at the center of every discussion. "This movement isn't about me," she often said. "It's about all of us, standing together for what's right." The ripple effects of Elise's actions continued to reshape industries. The airline that had once been at the heart of the controversy was now a model for ethical practices. Following the trial, it had implemented far-reaching reforms, including fair wages, improved safety standards, and a commitment to diversity and inclusion. These changes weren't just cosmetic. They were embedded into the company's culture, thanks in large part to the relentless efforts of Elise and her allies. Government policy had also shifted, spurred by the momentum Elise's case had generated. Labor laws were strengthened, whistleblower protections expanded, and corporate accountability measures enforced. Elise frequently met with lawmakers, using her platform to advocate for systemic change. She wasn't afraid to call out complacency or push for bolder action, earning both respect and criticism for her unwavering stance. But Elise knew the work was far from done. Inequality and exploitation persisted, and she was determined to keep fighting. She began focusing on mentorship, dedicating time to guiding the next generation of activists and leaders. Through workshops, one-on-one sessions, and public forums, she shared her experiences and lessons learned, encouraging others to find their own voices and take action. One of Elise's proudest moments came when a group of young activists she had mentored successfully organized a campaign to address wage theft in the gig economy. Their efforts led to policy changes that benefited millions of workers, further cementing the idea that collective action could achieve lasting impact. Watching these emerging leaders carry the torch forward, Elise felt a sense of fulfillment that no personal accolade could match. Despite her public role, Elise remained deeply connected to the people who had supported her from the beginning. She frequently visited communities affected by the very issues she fought against, listening to their stories and finding ways to help. These interactions grounded her, reminding her of why she had started this journey in the first place. Her personal life, too, had found balance. Elise had reconnected with her love of flying, albeit in a different capacity. She often traveled to meet with workers, advocates, and policymakers, using her time in the air to reflect and recharge. Though she no longer wore the uniform of a flight attendant, she carried the same sense of purpose that had defined her early years in the industry. Elise's relationships with her family and close friends had strengthened over time. They had been her anchors during the most challenging moments of her journey, and she never took their support for granted. Quiet dinners, long walks, and moments of laughter reminded her that even amidst the chaos of her public life, she was never alone. As the years passed, Elise began to think about the legacy she wanted to leave behind. It wasn't about statues or awards. She had long rejected the notion of individual heroism. Instead, she focused on creating systems and structures that would outlast her, ensuring that the movement she had helped ignite would continue to thrive. She poured her energy into building coalitions, fostering partnerships, and equipping others with the tools they needed to lead. Elise's story continued to inspire art, literature, and activism. Documentaries chronicled her journey, plays depicted her courtroom battle, and books analyzed the societal impact of her actions. She supported these endeavors, not for personal gain but because she believed in the power of storytelling to drive change. "Stories connect us," she often said. "They remind us of our shared humanity and our capacity to build a better world." In one particularly poignant moment, Elise was invited to speak at an international summit on workers' rights. As she stood before a packed audience of activists, policymakers, and industry leaders, she shared not just her story but the stories of those who had walked alongside her. "This movement was never about one person," she said. "It's about all of us, fighting for a world where dignity, fairness, and justice are not privileges but rights." Elise ended her speech with a call to action, urging everyone in the room to continue the work she had started. The applause that followed was deafening, but Elise knew the true measure of her impact would be in the actions taken long after the applause faded. As she left the stage, Elise felt a sense of peace. Her journey had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every sacrifice. She had taken a moment of crisis and turned it into a catalyst for change, proving that even the smallest spark could ignite a powerful flame. In the years to come, Elise would continue her work, always striving to push boundaries and challenge the status quo. But she also knew when to step back, allowing others to lead and ensuring the movement remained a collective effort. Her legacy wasn't in the accolades or headlines, it was in the countless lives she had touched, the systems she had helped transform, and the enduring belief that one voice, no matter how small, could make a difference.